Esteemed teachers, it gives us great pleasure to introduce the International Model United Nations Conference and Middle East Summit, organized by ACSI's Young Diplomat Society. Model United Nations, or MUN for short, is a simulation of the important negotiations that go on in the United Nations. Students role-play as ambassadors or delegates of a nation in committees. Each committee is an international organization like the UN Security Council or the Group of 20 that are modeled after their real-life counterparts. Over the course of 3 days, students will do research and present their country's positions on various issues. These issues range from domestic issues, such as that of haze, and to regional issues, such as the South China Sea dispute.
Oppenheimer once said upon the detonation of the first atomic bomb that I have become death, destroyer of worlds. Delegates has a huge responsibility placed before the international community. We can either choose to regulate nuclear weapons and ensure that they do not fall in the hands of terrorist groups or rogue states, or we can let these nuclear weapons fall into the hands of terrorists, allow our world as we know to collapse, allow millions of innocent civilians to die. I believe the choice is obvious. We have to ensure that the rules and regulations that exist regarding nuclear weapons do not allow these nuclear weapons to fall into the hands of terrorists. We must strengthen them. We must have checks and balances to ensure that beyond our watch as we know it, the rogue states are not aiding in the development of such nuclear weapons, and that such nuclear weapons will not be used against innocent civilians and to destroy civilization as we know it. There is a massive responsibility in front of the global community, and as a wise man once said, that with great power comes great responsibility. We have great power, let's exercise this responsibility.
After intense discussion, they are expected to come up with solutions that are amenable to all parties.
On the discussion on child labour, do you have any solutions?
Well, I was just discussing this with the delegate of the United Kingdom, and we were considering the prospect of having international organizations like the IMF or World Bank implement long-term recovery loans that are conditional based on righting the human rights situation in those countries.
But I think before we start with any of this, we need to look at existing institutions under the United Nations. We need to look at the status quo of the situation. We need to rework definitions so that they're more workable, more viable for governments to deal with.
I, as a delegate of Bolivia, completely agree with the delegates of US and UK, because you have to understand, we cannot simply outright ban child labour. In countries such as Bolivia and Bangladesh, child labour contributes to a large proportion of national income.
Okay, but I think one key thing that we're missing over here is the fact that, as the delegate of Bolivia mentioned, child labour makes up a large portion of our economies, and child labour is basically the main source of income for certain families. So, in order to make sure that the families can provide for themselves, in order to make sure that the children can go to school, the children can afford the healthcare that they require, we need to provide loans not to countries but to families instead. We need to provide low interest loans in order to make sure that those families can provide for themselves in the future. So, what does the delegate of France think about this?
As a delegate of France, I think that everyone has raised very legitimate and very interesting points. I think we need to reach a compromise, so maybe we can, let's say, write a resolution that enables us to cooperate on the same issue.
Sure. In a format based on the United Nations, delegates will come up with solutions. Together, they will craft and vote for a draft resolution.
Alright, so I was looking through several sections of the Arusha Accords, right? And it seems that in invoking Article 4, which would allow the African Union to have military intervention in the country, that would undermine the sovereignty of Burundi. So would that actually be a viable solution?
But we must remember that the UN in the past has violated the sovereignty of countries so as to maintain international order. Doing so in Burundi would not be a violation of international law, and on the contrary, I believe would be a promotion of international law as per our stance. In fact, you can check out this binder of research which we've done so far, which illustrates a lot of the concepts involved here, the concepts regarding international law. And I think we will elucidate to you that this intervention in Burundi would not be a transgression of the legal system which binds African countries together.
But you see, right, there's this one article that I pulled up, right, that sort of states that it warns against military intervention because of the sort of long-term impacts that is left behind from military intervention, like a certain dependency on it for the restoration of order from chaos. So I was thinking if there's any way that we can sort of sidestep those issues.
I guess that's important because there are cases where intervention has been successful. I read a recent article by the Washington Post on Mali where the intervention was successful and it did minimize casualties and human suffering. So I have an idea. Let's look at the examples of successful interventions and base our plans off that.
Because of this, MUNs are a key opportunity to cultivate students' talents as effective communicators and valuable team players. But going beyond that, students come to understand complex economic and geopolitical forces that shape the world around them. In a country like Singapore, vulnerable to these volatile influences, it is especially important for our young leaders to be aware and sensitive to the world around them. IMUNC and MES are 3-day conferences held during the June holidays. While IMUNC is targeted at secondary school students, MES focuses on critical issues in the Middle East and is geared towards tertiary level students. Both aim to provide empathy and critical thinking while allowing participants to gain a wider perspective of global affairs. With hundreds of delegates present each year, IMUNC and MES are platforms for students of all ages to discuss pertinent issues with other like-minded individuals. More than a decade in the running, IMUNC is an experience unlike any other. Firstly, we provide a wide range of committees of varying difficulties for different delegates. Our student facilitators are approachable and experienced, carefully selected to provide guidance to participating students. Secondly, we are committed to providing an immersive experience for our delegates through our dedicated team of political actors, who act as key individuals such as heads of states or newsmakers in the media. Our political actors challenge delegates to think critically when new issues surface.
Thirdly, a hallmark of IMAN are our Joint Crisis Committees, or JCC. These are tailored specifically for more experienced delegates and consist of 3 simultaneously run councils in real time, each representing one faction in the context of a geopolitical crisis. This could be a modern one, such as the Russian annexation of Crimea, or a historical conflict, such as the Cold War. Delegates would therefore take on the roles of important political leaders during this specific time frame and have to craft and execute strategies to lead their nation to eventual victory. So, Allied Generals, what plans do you have for the coming campaign in this crisis?
I was thinking of moving the 19th Army over to the northwestern front in order to reinforce Russian troops already there, failing which we retreat and create a strategic advantage by trading space for time.
Given the failure of German bombing on the United Kingdom, I would suggest moving 3 Spitfire squadrons to attack near Calais and Normandy in order to gain momentum.
In order to help our British forces, the American forces will be willing to send in more troops and more aid into UK in order to help them with their amphibious attack.
Given recent German movements in Algeria and Libya, I was thinking we could move troops from Gambia and Ivory Coast towards the north of Africa.
Lastly, I believe we should apply pressure on the Japanese by moving the US fleet into the Central Pacific, where we hold a strategic advantage. This will relieve the pressure on our Chinese allies and will allow for the US carrier squadron to get into a favorable position.
These sound like good plans. Let's put these together in a document and present them as a directive that will outline our solutions and help out the war effort. Thank you. As shown, GCC councils are renowned in the local circuit for being dynamic and quick-paced. They give opportunities for delegates to change the course of history as the situation responds to the actions they take. They have a higher degree of complexity than normal councils and allow advanced delegates to stretch their abilities and challenge themselves.
We look forward to seeing you at IMUNC and MES next year.